Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Seth Licciardello.
Another week of major developments in US politics. For the first time since the 1960s, an American president has decided to end his re-election campaign.
And Republicans are suddenly trying to figure out how do you beat Vice President Kamala Harris. It certainly looks like things have got a bit tougher for them.
It does. Our guest this week, former Democratic Party Chair Howard Dean, on what's just gone down and whether he thinks that Kamala Harris can capture that grassroots enthusiasm that he, Obama and Bernie had, but arguably Hillary and Biden never quite tapped into.
And we're going to talk to one of the leaders of the campaign to push Biden out of the race. That was Congressman Seth Moulton. We'll look at some of the potential running mates for Kamala Harris as well.
But first, this week, to Joe Biden's Oval Office address yesterday. It was just the fourth such address of his presidency, confirming his decision to step down from the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination. And he framed that decision as being a choice between his personal ambition and safeguarding American democracy, by which he clearly meant safeguarding it from Donald Trump.
You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party in this critical endeavor. I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
There was a poignancy and a sort of a quiet defiance about that speech, I thought, from Biden. I don't know what you thought, but my takeaway was the context was really important. If that was Joe Biden saying, here's why I'm staying in the race, Democrats would have been freaking out still and thinking this guy's just got to go. But because he's saying, look, I'm not running for re-election, but I am staying president for the next 6 months, it was like, yeah, fair enough. I think he can do the job.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a good time to be Joe Biden because, as you say, if he was announcing he was staying, people would have been analysing every little phoneme, every syllable, going, oh, he didn't say that very well. But people didn't pay much attention. They didn't care. They were like, oh, cool, he's alive. For a while, people were worried he was dead. He's alive, great, let's just move on. And what, the people who were abusing Biden a week ago, who are cursing his name, now are hailing him as the new George Washington.
Right.
He's again the hero trip from Democrats.
Giving up power.
Yeah, so it's a good time to be Joe Biden. He maybe should have enjoyed this good time about 12 months ago.
Yeah, and, you know, it was interesting, I thought. He doesn't, in these kinds of speeches, the fact that he brought up his childhood stutter, and he clearly, you know, kind of think that's part of the reason why I don't sound so great these days. But at the end of just an 11-minute Oval Office address, he was speaking at barely a whisper. Yeah. Even when he was running through kind of a Biden's greatest hits of you know, like very familiar phrases in so much of it. But we did get that first-hand insight as to what went down, why it went down, and what he still wants to achieve.
Sure. Yeah, look, I mean, he's gone. It's we're moving on, but... Yeah. Forget the stutter. I've got the stutter. I know what a stutter is, okay? Yeah. That's not his problem.
Yeah, well...
He's getting old. That's the problem.
Yeah, although there is evidence that say that older stutterers, it does come back a little bit.
Oh,
so watch out when you're 81.
Don't tell me that.
Watch out when you're 81. Well, so much for Joe Biden. Vice President Harris has had a whirlwind first few days as the presumptive Democratic nominee, working the phones after Biden's tweet on Sunday that announced his withdrawal initially. She clinched major endorsements, first from Biden himself, then from the Clintons, then one by one she got the endorsement of her potential rivals. Then she went to the Biden-Harris campaign headquarters, it still was at that time on Monday. She rallied the troops there. She said, yeah, you've all still got jobs. She saw $250 million in fundraising pour in the first 24 hours. Then she hit the campaign trail in Wisconsin, crucial swing state, in her first rally, and she went right on the attack against Donald Trump.
As a prosecutor, I specialized in cases involving sexual abuse. Well, Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big Wall Street banks and held them accountable for fraud. Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud on 34 counts.
And seeing that, some Democrats are getting a little bit giddy, particularly over some polls that have come out. They're quite encouraging, like this one today from Siena for the New York Times had Kamala Harris leading Trump by 1 point in a five-way split of voters. Trump is still 1 point ahead in a head-to-head matchup. A number of swing state polls, though, from Emerson today also have Harris tied with Trump or within 2 or 3 points, which is the margin of error, whereas Biden in recent weeks has been lagging in some of those must-win states by 5, 6, 7, 8 points. Some safely Democratic states like New Hampshire and Virginia and New Mexico were suddenly looking like battleground states. They were freaking out, frankly, and part of the reason for the push on Biden. And here, just earlier today, came Kamala Harris's first official campaign ad using Beyonce's hit tune, Freedom.
In this election, we each face a question. What kind of country do we want to live in? There are some people who think we should be a country of chaos, of fear, of hate. But us, we choose something different. We choose freedom.
Freedom, freedom, I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah. Freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too.
The freedom not just to get by, but get ahead. The freedom to be safe from gun violence. The freedom to make decisions about your own body. We choose a future where no child lives in poverty, where we can all afford health care, where no one is above the law. We believe in the promise of America, and we're ready to fight for it. Because when we fight, we win. So join us. Go to KamalaHarris.com and let's get to work.
I'ma keep on running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
Co-opting the word fight, co-opting the word freedom, co-opting the Republican message.
Yeah.
It works.
Reclaiming the word freedom that was once associated with the civil rights movement and is now in Harris's telling about a woman's freedom to choose, for example. So, yeah, very clever. And there is definitely, in the first 5 days at least, a vibe. Whether that's kind of a whiplash from the despair of last week to an irrational exuberance this week, we will only know the answer to that in, 15 weeks.
Yeah, look, you're certainly right about the giddiness in some Democrats. I mean, I'm not sure if you saw Chuck Schumer the other day. He looked like he'd just taken an edible.
When I spoke with her Sunday, she said she wanted the opportunity to win the nomination on her own and to do so from the grassroots up, not top down. So now that the process is played out, from the grassroots bottom up, we are here today to throw our support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm clapping. You don't have to. It's a happy day. What can I say?
He's talking about the grassroots choosing Kamala Harris. Is that a bit much, John? I mean, she
Well, if
she
by
hit the
grassroots
phones.
you mean Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, is this a problem?
Look, I think back to what DNC member and rules writer Elaine Kmark told us on Planet America 2 incredibly long weeks ago when we were talking about was Biden going to be forced out, and she said, well, you can't beat somebody with nobody.
Yes.
This week, they couldn't beat Kamala Harris with nobody. Nobody was prepared to step forward. I'm interested at the fact that there were 4 or 5 potential rivals to Harris who waited till Monday. They didn't jump on Sunday to say I endorse her. They waited till Monday. Maybe they saw the writing on the wall. Maybe they just wanted to take a bit of a sounding, or maybe they just wanted a bit of clear air and have a conversation. Maybe put their chances for a VP slot a little bit higher on her list of priorities. Either way, there's no point claiming this was a grassroots thing. This is the safety chute coming out after they've been free falling like this, trying to pull the parachute for weeks.
Look, and to be fair, I would have loved the Democrats to have a proper primary at some point in time.
Would have loved a contested convention.
Yeah, well, now it's too late. Now it's too late. Like, if they did this in the convention, it would be way too late. The votes for mail-in voting were like weeks later. It was too late to start a campaign then. Yeah. So the problem was 6 months ago. Now they're just following through with the problem that occurred 6 months ago and doing their best to not throw away the election.
Yeah, the problem is April last year when Joe Biden said he was running for a second term as the oldest person to ever serve as president.
Exactly.
That was the problem, and that's the thing that, people have been tactfully overlooking this week.
Yeah.
Joe Biden, thank you for your service, better than average president, but my God, man, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, what a selfish, he may be selfless now, very selfish act last year to think that he could defy human biology.
Yeah.
And to try and serve as president to the age of 86?
Yeah, look, I agree. And what we're seeing is just the flow through from that.
Yeah.
So I'm not too down on the Democrats following this option. I don't think they have any other choice. As far as their happiness goes, I think you're right about the fact that this is because where they came from. They've just literally had a near-death experience. They have spent the last 3 months staring at their electoral mortality, just thinking, how bad is this going to get? How long do we have to lie and put a happy face on this untenable situation, losing our dignity and still losing the election anyway? They would have been just depressed as all hell. And then all of a sudden, second chance.
Yeah.
You never get a second chance. What an opportunity. And so they're just got the zeal of the unexpected second chance.
Right. It's the same sort of survivor's euphoria that we saw amongst Republicans and Trump last week after he literally survived an assassin's bullet or piece of shrapnel, if the FBI director is right on that. So it's understandable that there has been this big emotional turnaround. The question to me is, when the first thing goes wrong for Kamala Harris, the gaffe, the campaign slip, the choice for VP that they don't like, and we'll talk about that shortly, do they immediately plummet back into despair, or do they keep going if there is this sort of express train that is going to carry her through to November? It's possible that it will.
I don't think they're going to lapse into despair when things go wrong, and I'm sure they will go wrong at some point in time, because there's always hope that you can improve the situation in the future with Kamala Harris. With Joe Biden, there was no hope because everyone knew it was getting worse.
Of course.
It was going to get worse.
Ageing works like that.
Exactly. With Kamala Harris, you go, okay, today was a terrible day. Tomorrow might be okay.
She can be a better candidate tomorrow.
Yeah, so I don't think there will be that same despair. Yeah. I also think that they've got massive opportunities now with Kamala Harris that they didn't have with Joe Biden, in that she has a unique situation where she's got some of the advantages of incumbency, but she has no responsibility.
Yes.
Because she's not the president. Yeah. She can distance herself from whatever she wants to from the last 4 years. She can say, well, that wasn't my bag. I actually have a different view from that.
Yeah.
She's in Trump's position. She can take pot shots if she wants to against Trump. The other advantage she has is, remember how American elections work. They're about negative polarization. They're about who you hate. The Democrats have had 10 years building their hate up on Donald Trump.
Yes.
Now, in Fox News, they've had a few stabs at Kamala Harris over the years, but they haven't had her in the gun like they have with Joe Biden. Yeah. So Trump is miles behind in building the hate on Kamala Harris, which is what he needs to win the election.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they've got a real opportunity for Kamala Harris to play a small target strategy, to not say anything of any consequence whatsoever, and to hide for 15 weeks as far as from tough issues go.
And run a very positive message, focusing on the future, to say let's not go back to that. Let's leave all that behind. All of that includes Biden and Trump particularly. Yeah. But it also means that she's able to, she hasn't been talking non-stop about Israel and the Palestinians for the last year. She hasn't been literally hugging Bibi Netanyahu. After meeting him in private for the first time earlier today, she then comes out and says, I call on Israel to accept the ceasefire deal. We need to end this war. She suddenly, just because she said it, if there's a ceasefire in the next week, it's suddenly, she's brought peace to the Middle East.
And she can do that because her words are cheap. The president's words are not cheap.
And if it doesn't happen, there's still the promise that she can make it happen after January, which is what Trump has been promising for bringing peace to Ukraine. He can promise anything, which is why, Trump was in such a strong position, because this was an anti-incumbent election. This was a change election. Harris is more change than Trump is, because we tried him before. And he wasn't a great president by any objective analysis. There were some things that people liked, some things they didn't like. There were some things he did that were really bad. Kamala Harris has a better record. No, hasn't got the same highs, hasn't got the same lows.
And the best opportunity of all, which I didn't see coming, I can't explain this. This confuses me completely, John. Maybe you can shed light on this, is somehow Kamala Harris, who has been a terrible performer at times over the last 4 to 5 years, has said some befuddling things, some awkward things, some just made no sense at all things. All those negatives have suddenly become positive somehow on the internet. I don't get this. So have a look at this.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
I'm just living that life. Fun Dutch cult classic, but I still pop every time my track drops. You're jealous. I'm just living that life.
Everything is in context.
That's basement. I'm just living that
And if you wonder what all that brat stuff is,
Yeah, explain.
according to Charlie XCX, that's her song,
English pop star.
she says,
Very big at the moment, apparently.
Brat is that girl who is a little messy and likes to party and maybe says dumb things sometimes, who feels herself but then also maybe has a breakdown but parties through it. It's very honest, it's very blunt, a little bit volatile, does dumb things, but like it's Brat. You're Brat. That's Brat.
It's the Brat summer, apparently. It's very interesting, though. I mean, what they're essentially saying in that Brat terminology, but also just the memes that are taking off. It is Kamala Harris being authentic, her laughing, her saying thoughtful things, but also fun things, dancing, etc., being disinhibited in that way. Donald Trump is probably the last politician we saw who's like that. Trump dances. Trump says things that are unfiltered. He doesn't laugh, and that concerns people. Interesting that he's kind of backed away from the laugh and Kamala thing, because what's so wrong with laughing and smiling? Obviously, you need to be able to also be serious, which Harris can do. Sometimes the gears change from talking about coconut trees to the context is a little abrupt. But that authenticity was something that was lacking in her primary campaign in 2019, because she was trying to choose which lane she could possibly get past Bernie and Biden and Warren and Buttigieg, and there was just no way through, and she looked like a politician with no core beliefs. Now she's able to say, well, she's living her core beliefs. Her identity is a big part of what she stands for, about equality and freedom and rights and recognition and so on. And then she can lay down this vision for the future. It could be quite effective. It will at least get Democrats close in November in a way that they were not going to be under Biden.
You're absolutely right. The knock on her in 2019 was inauthentic.
Right.
And this stuff is actually her being her. You're right. And the best part is it's not from the campaign. It's from punters.
Yep.
So which is authentic. That is something that Trump had going for him as well.
Yes.
An actual groundswell of support from real people, not staged from the campaign. And the best thing about it for her as well is that since it's focusing on the laughing and the dancing, what that's doing is it's playing the age card for her without saying it. Like it's making her high energy and contrasting with Donald Trump without her even needing to do it. They're doing it for her. And of course, she needs the youth vote. That's going to be important for her. This brings attention to her from young people. Now, a lot of them won't vote, but at least these people she's reaching wouldn't have been reached otherwise.
Yep.
So she's at least getting people's attention. And it's not her doing. She's just really lucky.
Yep.
But anyway, so she's got a lot of advantages.
Yeah, there were about 80 million Americans who could have voted in 2020 when it was made easier than it was ever made before to vote. They were eligible to vote, they were registered to vote, they did not vote. 80 million of them. The election was decided by fewer than 80,000 votes. If Kamala Harris, through being a little bit different to these old white guys we've been seeing for a long time in American politics, if she can motivate some of those people in the right places, in the right parts of Atlanta and Pittsburgh and elsewhere, then she has a real shot at winning this election. For more on this dramatic change of the guard in politics this week, we are joined by Congressman Seth Moulton. He was one of the first Democrats to publicly raise their concerns about Joe Biden's fitness to serve 4 more years as America's president. Congressman Moulton, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
How would you describe the mood amongst your fellow Democrats today compared to just 1 week ago?
Oh my God, we are elated. We are so excited, optimistic, hopeful. We know there's a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. but we feel we've got a strong path to winning now. And the concern with the president was just that we couldn't win the election.
So how do you respond to those who say that the Democrats and the media should have been far more sceptical about Biden's fitness for office months ago?
Well, we're not talking about his fitness for office. We're talking about his ability to run for re-election and to win. I mean, that's what this is about. It's about beating Donald Trump in November. And the polls were very clear. There was word on the street. We just don't think that President Biden can put together a winning campaign between now and the election. And that's fundamentally why we convinced him to step aside.
So, Congressman, tell us, was that debate performance the first time you had serious concerns about Joe Biden's fitness to win this election and serve 4 more years, or had you had concerns prior to then?
To be honest, I've had concerns for some time, but not serious concerns to the level of what I saw in the debate. When the debate happened, a few weeks after I had been in a small group with the president in Normandy for the anniversary of D-Day, and he didn't seem to recognize me for the first time, putting 2 and 2 together there made me gravely concerned for his ability to win an election, to run a successful campaign.
And how do you respond to those on the left who say, why are we worried about Biden having a few senior moments when Trump's character makes him far less fit to be president than Biden?
Look, everyone who's worried about that, and I agree that Trump is much more concerning, should be focused on what we need to do to win the election. And the bottom line is that we were just not on a path to winning with the president. So it's not about comparing these 2 senior citizens and who has more issues. It's about what do we need to do as Democrats to ensure we win in November.
And do you have any regrets at all now, Congressman, about the private and public pressure that was exerted on Joe Biden in recent weeks to step aside?
Well, I tried to do this privately. I called his inner circle, as many people as I could, to encourage the president and his advisors to make the decision to step aside. And it was only after those private calls went nowhere that I decided to go public with my concerns, to turn up the pressure a bit. And then a couple weeks after that, to write an op-ed explaining how I came to that decision and, in effect, turn up the pressure a little bit more.
So, Congressman, do you think that this election is salvageable for the Democrats from here now?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the energy and enthusiasm among Democrats is something I haven't seen in months, maybe in a couple years. And on the other side of this aisle, I can see how concerned the Republicans are. They had a playbook to defeat Joe Biden. Donald Trump is nervous about even debating Kamala Harris. This is a lot. This is going well for us right now. But of course, there's tremendous work ahead. I mean, 3 months is a short period of time to put together a successful campaign. I believe the vice president can do it. I believe Democrats will unify and rally behind her. I believe we can win this election, but it's not going to be easy.
And how vulnerable do you think your party will be to claims that the Democratic Party is not democratic? You had no primary to pick this candidate because, you know, if Trump loses in November, he's going to say this amounts to fraud.
I mean, look, Donald Trump never takes responsibility for anything and blames everyone else. So, of course, we should expect him to do that or something like it. And Republicans are going to follow his every word and parrot his every talking point. So, yes, you're going to hear that criticism and many others from the other side of the aisle. But we are doing everything by the books. We are following the law as Democrats do, as Democrats have consistently done. And what's happening right now, frankly, is Republicans are just nervous because they know we've got a great candidate who's going to present an optimistic vision for the future of our country. And it will be a tremendous contrast to the dark Project 2025, taking away rights from Americans vision that Donald Trump has to bring us backwards.
So what do you think a winning campaign looks like from here? What should the main messages be?
Well, first of all, there's a philosophy, which is that Vice President Harris has this great position of being able to embrace all the successes out of the Biden-Harris team, the things that she was a part of, the things that she really loves, like passing tremendous bipartisan legislation that Republicans brag about even when they voted against it. I mean, this is an amazing phenomenon. This happens with the bipartisan infrastructure law across the country, for example. But she also can distance herself from policies that she disagreed with. So I would like to hear if she has any differences with President Biden on his immigration policy, for example, because we know the Republicans are attacking us on the border. There may be other places where the vice president lays out her own agenda that differs a bit from President Biden's. So I think she's in a great position. We're eager to see exactly what her campaign platform is going to be. But I'm optimistic that she can craft a winning message for November.
Historically, Congressman, a lot of incumbent vice presidents who become the nominee have struggled to get that balance of trying to take some credit for the good things the administration has achieved while achieving enough distance to avoid the negatives and create a vision for the future that is their own. What do you think Kamala Harris has to do, and are there areas where she can distance herself from Biden?
Well, I think immigration is one. I mean, the Republicans are going to attack her on this. She was designated by the president to go to the border, but then really wasn't given much power to actually change policies and fix it. So I think she needs to tell that story. She needs to talk about it. She needs to talk about it. I'm sure she'll do it in a way that's deferential to President Biden, but also she's a strong leader and she's going to say where she disagrees. She's a career prosecutor. She's going to say how she's going to enforce the law at the border and at cities across the country where we have an influx of migrants. She's in a great position based on her experience to talk about that. That's probably the biggest issue.
Finally, Seth Moulton, do you have a preference as to who Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate should be, and what do you think should be the factors that determine that choice?
No, I don't have any preferences for vice president, but I'll tell you what, there are a lot of people who are talented and ready to go on the Democratic bench. And that's one of the things that people haven't seen in America in a while, is just how broad our bench is, how many great talented leaders there are in the Democratic Party across the country. So I hope that the vice presidential vetting process, where she looks at all the different options, will also be an opportunity to showcase the strength of the Democratic Party across America.
Congressman Seth Moulton, thanks for having a fireside chat.
All right, thanks for having me.
Now, there is a lot of speculation about who Kamala Harris will choose as her vice presidential running mate, and her team hasn't got long to vet all of the possible picks. It's just about a week and a half until the expected virtual roll call vote of Democratic delegates gets underway. They have to have it sealed by then. Former US Attorney General Eric Holder, we understand, is leading the vetting process, and multiple reports now suggest up to a dozen potential running mates are being asked to provide some of the kinds of things that go into the vetting process: financial records, personal histories, any skeletons in the closet, other documentation and so on, as required, gets requested depending on how far they go in the process. Let's have a look at some of the names that you should be listening out for at the moment. First, let's run through the governors. Andy Beshear of Kentucky, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Roy Cooper of North Carolina, Gavin Newsom of California, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Wes Moore of Maryland, and Tim Walz of Minnesota. Then come the senators, Mark Kelly of Arizona and Raphael Warnock of Georgia. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who's also a former governor of Rhode Island, is being talked about in the vetting process, as is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, former presidential candidate and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. It is worth noting, though, that Gavin Newsom has already basically ruled himself out, and that's a pragmatic kind of a call. It won't be him, you'd think. You wouldn't have a former senator from California like Kamala Harris picking the governor of California. There's no sense in that on a ticket balancing kind of a thing. And also Gretchen Whitmer has said that she doesn't want to leave Michigan. She's staying where she is. And again, you'd say that's probably pragmatism, an all-female ticket. Maybe just a little bit too much for some of the older white male voters. That being said, if Whitmer or Newsom were asked, they'd probably say, yeah, sure, I'll be on the first plane to Washington. So let's highlight two that I think are probably at the top of the list right now.
Yep.
We don't know for sure, but there's a lot of talk around them. Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania and Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. Shapiro first. Here's what to know. He's 51 years old, so 8 years younger than Harris. He is a popular first-term governor of Pennsylvania, and that, of course, is a must-win state for Democrats. He is also a more moderate political figure than Harris. Some polls suggest up to 1 in 3 Trump voters in Pennsylvania support Josh Shapiro. And just as Kamala Harris is sometimes called the female Obama, Shapiro has been called the white Obama, a generational political talent whose speaking style and mannerism suggest that he's probably spent a lot of time watching Obama and maybe practicing a bit in front of the mirror. He's been getting a lot of questions this week about maybe becoming VP, giving him a bit of an audition at attacking Trump.
What I am focused on is making sure we don't go back to Donald Trump's chaos and that we elect Kamala Harris the next president of the United States. I will tell you that I have known the vice president for nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years. We have both been prosecutors. We have both stood up for the rule of law, and we have always both been for the people. That is diametrically opposed to everything Donald Trump has stood for. A man who has routinely screwed over the people. A man who has no respect for the rule of law.
I don't know who refers to Kamala Harris as the female Obama, but I'll tell you now, he sometimes sounds identical to Obama if you close your eyes. Honestly, I think that Josh Shapiro is incredibly talented. I think he's better than Obama in a lot of situations. Maybe not in the big sort of convention speech scenario, but off the cuff, he's way better than Obama. He never says or ah. He never gets professorial. He's sharp. He uses humour very effectively. He's an amazing politician. He really should be the nominee if they were picking the best person to be the presidential nominee. And so, I mean, I don't know why she wouldn't go for him, except for the one thing about him that's a problem potentially with the Democrats is that he is the most pro-Israel Democrat. The most.
Yep.
And she's going to have trouble winning Michigan as it is, I feel, because Kamala Harris is not going to do well with the white working class. She's going to be back to Hillary Clinton's zone, I think, as far as the white working class goes. And so she's going to have trouble holding Michigan as it is. With Josh Shapiro, that might make it harder.
Yep.
So that's the only exception. Other than that, he's perfect.
Yeah. Well, it will be interesting to see if Josh Shapiro, given that he has got those sort of Rust Belt moderate credentials, he appeals to Republicans in Pennsylvania. Can he appeal to some of those independents or Republican-leading independents in Michigan to make up for the maybe 200,000 Arab American Michiganders who might stay at home and not vote on the Democratic ticket or cast a vote for Bobby Kennedy or somebody else instead. Let's have a look at the other name that is coming up a lot at the moment, and that is Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. Mark Kelly has a very compelling life story. He's 60 years old, just a few months older than Kamala Harris. He's a former US Navy pilot. He fought in Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. He then joined NASA in the 1990s. He became an astronaut on the space shuttle. He served time on the International Space Station. He's also married to former Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. You remember her, she was shot in the head at a constituent event in 2011. She survived, but she was left with lasting injuries. Well, Mark Kelly won election to the Arizona Senate seat once held by another decorated war veteran, John McCain. And he has inherited some of the same air of the maverick that McCain had about him. And like Shapiro, Kelly is more of a centrist than Kamala Harris is. He would also potentially provide a boost in not just a battleground state in Arizona, but a border state as well. He has a bit of cred there. Nobody calls Mark Kelly any kind of Obama, however. He is definitely a competent political performer, but he is not in person as inspiring as his life story would suggest. Perhaps he's no kind of John Glenn, all-American hero astronaut type. You kind of figure that maybe he got picked because he's kind of small. He might fit into a tight space in a space station. But look, he's been asked this week whether he wants the job of vice president. Here's what he had to say.
Do you accept it? Again, this is not about me. I mean, this is about the future of this country. You know, whether we want to take this country back to 2016 and 2020 when the world was a much more dangerous place when Donald Trump was president of the United States. The damage he did to our alliances is we're still recovering from. What do you think? We do not need to go back to that.
He's certainly moderate, Kelly. He's certainly popular. He's good with the border as well.
Yep.
But yeah, he's a bit of a charisma-free zone. He's certainly not someone who's going to win people over on the stump. But yeah, there's other people as well, like talking about charisma-free zones, but who's also well liked, Pete Buttigieg.
Yep.
He's never been an inspirational figure, but man, he can turn up on Fox News and he can defend you like no one else.
He's a great performer.
So yeah, so he'd be really good.
But he doesn't win you a state. He doesn't win you Pennsylvania or Arizona. He definitely doesn't win you a state.
Yeah. He definitely. There's a question mark over whether anyone wins you a state. But he definitely doesn't win you a state. But he can at least represent Kamala Harris well on TV, which is something, and he's not going to nobble her. He's not someone who's going to try and advance his own interests at her expense. Another person who I feel is worth considering is Roy Cooper. who is the North Carolina governor. He's never lost an election in like 25 years.
Republicans like him, independents like him.
Absolutely. He's white working class gold. So if you want to win the Rust Belt, Roy Cooper is the person who is most likely to help you in that regard. He's a little bit older. He's 67. But I think that he's basically the opposite of Kamala Harris. So if you try and balance a ticket, he's the perfect person. And I actually think, unlike Michigan, I think North Carolina might be more likely than Michigan with Kamala Harris.
Right.
She has some advantages in North Carolina and some disadvantages in Michigan. So maybe he might help her win North Carolina, which, by the way, has one more electoral college vote than Michigan.
Right, so they can afford to lose Michigan if they win North Carolina.
That's right.
A couple of other names as well. Andy Beshear from Kentucky. He's a Democrat who wins a deeply Republican state, but would not win that state at the national level, so it's kind of a wash.
Yeah, I think so. Also, I mean, look, I should mention... My personal favourite politician is Jared Polis. He's kind of got my politics. He's kind of left libertarian. He's a lovely guy. He's not going to be vice president, but I just want to play one grab from him because I loved it.
She asked you to be her running mate. Would you accept?
Well, Dana, we're not even there, Dana. I appreciate the question. I love the job I'm doing. You know, I love Colorado. It's great. Obviously, if somebody asks, I take a serious look at it. But my phone hasn't rung yet. Look, if they do the polling and it turns out that they need a 49-year-old balding gay Jew from Boulder, Colorado, they got my number.
You'll be the vice president of my heart, Jared.
It's a niche demographic. Self-deprecating, intelligent, he hasn't got a chance. Let's get another take on what has been a dramatic week of developments in American politics. Earlier I spoke to the former Vermont governor and Democratic Party chair, Dr. Howard Dean, who also, of course, ran for the presidency himself 20 years ago in a campaign that did manage to tap into some of that youthful grassroots voter enthusiasm that Kamala Harris is now going to be wanting heading into November. What did you make of the way that President Biden was encouraged, indeed pressured, to give up his candidacy this year?
Well, I think he was pressured, but in the end, he was the one that made the decision. And the problem was this. I personally believe he could have served another term, although there was some, cognitive dementia and so forth. But plenty of people can perform plenty of jobs, and there have been presidents in much worse shape than him. The problem was we couldn't shift the narrative. The Trump people had been very successful, and this was the only narrative, and people were buying into it. They weren't talking about issues. They weren't talking about Trump's criminality. They were just talking about this. And we couldn't turn the ship around, and I think Biden finally did the right thing for the country.
Of course, you know from 2004 what it's like to reach the end of a presidential campaign. But what are the deciding factors, would you say?
Well, it's a very tough call. In my case, I ran out of money, so that wasn't such a tough call. But in his case, he has to hope against hope that he can win against the odds. And finally, the odds, I think, became insurmountable, and he realized he couldn't do it. And that was the right thing to do for the country.
I wonder as well, as a former head of the Democratic Party, Governor, would you have rather seen a proper competitive primary process rather than what we did see, which was essentially an immediate endorsement by the president and a number of other senior party figures, and everyone just fell into line behind Vice President Harris?
I mean, look, I think people, much to my amazement, the people have really coalesced around her instantly. She lined up the support. She made over 100 phone calls the very first day. I think people want to bring the party together. I think it's been a very difficult time for the Democratic Party, and they want somebody much younger. Now Trump's the old guy with a few cognitive deficiencies, so that'll be fun to argue about that. So I think there was only one candidate who had the experience in the presidential office, which was Kamala Harris, having been vice president for 3.5 years. She knows the issues very well. She knows a lot of foreign leaders, which is very important, even though Trump doesn't seem to think so. And so I think it was a no-brainer. And much to my amazement, in my home state of Vermont, which is the most Democratic state in the country, we gave Trump the smallest amount of his votes. And Nikki Haley won the primary here, the only one that she won. And in Vermont, last night, all our delegates unanimously voted to support Kamala Harris. So there's pretty much of a groundswell. She's already gone past the number of delegates that she needs to win. So she is effectively going to be the nominee as soon as we vote on it, which we will do in the next week or so, virtually.
I wonder, Governor, about that X factor, that extra level of enthusiasm. Certainly your campaign in 2003, 2004 had it. Barack Obama had it in spades. Since then, arguably maybe only Bernie Sanders has tapped into that grassroots enthusiasm. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden probably never did. Kamala Harris looks as though she might be about to catch that same wave. Is there anything you can do to tap into that particular energy in the party?
It will be replicated, and the reason is that Trump is the great unifier of Democrats. Trump is A, incompetent, B, I think he has diminished mental capacity, and C, he's a crook. He's an adjudicated crook. So there's a reaction of horror. The other thing that Harris does, which I've been very pleased about, is that she is able to connect with young voters. And we are doing abysmally among young voters. Trump isn't doing any better. They just sort of didn't care. And now I think they are interested in the first woman president, in the first South Asian president, in the first black woman president. That is of great interest to young people, is changing the formula, pushing my generation out of the way, which I think is long overdue. So I'm very, very optimistic about it's going to be very hard work. And Trump is not to be underestimated to the lengths of which he'll try to screw up the process. But I think we're going to win.
And Howard Dean, we have heard a lot about the so-called double haters, people that were not enthusiastic about either Biden or Trump, but were probably going to suck it up and vote for one of them anyway. Some of them have been parking their votes with third-party candidates, Kennedy, Stein, Cornel West. Is that 10% what Kamala Harris should be going for first? Is that the most winnable set of converts for her?
I don't think, first of all, I don't think the number will be anything close to 10%. And secondly, I think the reason that Trump and Kennedy are talking about Trump giving Kennedy a job is because those votes are not coming out of the Democrats. Kennedy's votes have come predominantly out of Trump, and he knows that, and they're having conversation, and he reportedly dangled a job in front of RFK Jr. So I no longer fear that. Marianne Williamson or people like that, you know, there's always going to be 1 or 2%, but they're not capable of mounting a campaign. And if young people are turned on by Harris, which they appear to be, at least now, it's very early, then there's no particular incentive to vote for a third-party candidate, certainly not Bobby Kennedy.
And of course, attention has quickly turned to who should be Kamala Harris's vice presidential running mate. What do you think are the considerations that should drive that choice?
Well, I can't tell you what her calculations are because we obviously haven't talked about that. I'll tell you in general what the calculations are. One, you want somebody who will cover your supposed weaknesses. I had one discussion when I thought I might win with somebody who's very strong on defense, and I'm not going to say who that was, but it was we did have one discussion. So if there's a weakness a perceived weakness in Kamala's resume, which is less likely since she's actually served in the White House, that will take into account. The most important, and of course, swing states, we need to bring 6 or 7 states along. Getting somebody, a credible candidate from one of the swing states would be good. But always, always, the most important factor is personal chemistry. Who can you work with? Who do you trust to be by your side? And that's something that worked very, very well for Obama and Biden, and then it worked very, very well for Biden and Harris. And I suspect that will be the number one consideration that Harris takes into account when she chooses her running mate.
Finally, Howard Dean, how do you reflect on the presidency of Joe Biden? Some will argue that he is one of the most consequential presidents in the last 50 years or more, possibly the best legislative president since Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. Others say, no, if he looks like anyone, he looks like Jimmy Carter. He wasn't able to keep the party together, wasn't able to keep inflation under control, and he looks like a bit of a failure. How do you think history should remember Joe Biden?
He got us out of Afghanistan after a number of presidents screwed that up or didn't have the wherewithal to counteract the generals and tell them they had to get the hell out. So I think on Afghanistan, he gets a big plus. The inflation has been minimal compared to what was under President Carter. And it was caused, frankly, by 2 things. One was the epidemic, which had the government pumping a ton of money into the economy, which led to inflation, and the other was Trump's fiscal policy. All Republicans want to give tax cuts to the richest people in America, which they do, but they never cut programs, so they create huge deficits, and that also leads to inflation. So yes, people complained about inflation, but I think that was a political issue, and it was true. There was some, and it was painful, but it was nothing like in the past. So I think Biden will go down. If you look at he's the first president to really seriously deal with climate change, and that alone is an extraordinary thing for any president to do.
We're just about out of time, but before we go, let's have a look at some of the Republican Party reaction to Biden's decision to quit the race. President Trump has had to abruptly change the script and turn his attacks onto Kamala Harris instead, while also trying to criticise Democrats for pushing Biden out.
The bosses, they said, either you get out or we're going to throw you out using the 25th Amendment. That's what happened, you know that. So, well, you know that. That's what happens. That's what happens. These are nasty people, the Democrats, so we better beat them or we're not going to have a country left. You're not going to have a country left. So now we have a new victim to defeat. Lion Kamala Harris. Lion. L-Y-I-N apostrophe. The most incompetent and far-left vice president in American history.
So the Lion thing's about saying that she covered up how decrepit Joe Biden had become. There's a big conspiracy about that.
There'll be a third nickname.
I'm sure, yeah. A lot of Republicans are also claiming that Kamala Harris is just simply not up to the job and that she is basically, in Trump's words, dumb as a rock. And according to Congressman Tim Burchett, she's a DEI or diversity hire, only picked because of her race and her gender.
What about white females? What about any other group? When you go down that route, you take mediocrity, and that's what they have right now as a vice president.
So are you suggesting she was a DEI hire?
100%. She was a DEI hire. He said he was going to hire, and she didn't. Her record is abysmal at best.
But not only is that racist and sexist, it's also dumb politics because Republicans need people who are diverse to vote for them if they're going to win in November. They need women. They need people of colour.
They've literally spent the last 3 months trying to win the black vote, and that's the best way to toss it away. Like, that's not very smart. I mean, they've got nothing on her at the moment. That's the thing. Sure. Back in 2019, she said a lot of extremely unfortunate, super left things trying to win the primary about, ban fracking, reparations. I could go on for ages. Like all things that she's going to want to run away from now. But it's been 5 years. She's been vice president. That didn't happen. So that's not going to work for them either. They're just waiting to have something to attack with her, and which is the reason why I said smart for her to do a small target strategy and not give them something to attack. The thing which they've got at the moment, I think, is their best shot is to attack her for the border, what they refer to as her being the border czar.
Yep.
Biden never referred to her as the border czar. That was what the media said. And look,
she did have an administration role looking at illegal immigration and the flow of asylum seekers from South and Central America. Though.
Well, we need to specify here that what it was about focusing on Central America, the root causes, right? And people think that you're spinning for her when you say this, but I'm not. That's what Joe Biden said when he appointed her.
But I've asked her, the VP, today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks stemming the migration to our southern border.
So, as you can see, it wasn't about her standing on the border with a Tommy gun, stopping the immigrants. It was about dealing with Mexico and South America. And to be honest, they didn't give her a lot of resources or opportunity to do it either. She didn't do a great job, but it was very symbolic, right?
Yep.
And the
border isn't as big a problem as it was 18 months ago as well, so it may be a less potent attack.
Yeah, in July, they're on target for the lowest number of border crosses since September 2020. Like, in the last few months of Trump had more. So it might resonate less as an issue going forward. But look, that's the best thing they've got at the moment. So they're going to attack that.
Yep, well, I guess they got 100-some days to try and find something a little bit more potent than that.
I think there'll be some gaps.
Yeah, we'll see. That's it, though, for another Fireside Chat. If you missed this week's Planet America, you will find it on YouTube, and Facebook. And we will see you again on Wednesday night on ABC TV. Check your local guides for times or catch up later.
And we're going to have another Fireside Chat next Friday night on ABC News. And don't forget, there is always the Pep Podcast in all the best pod places.
Bye-bye.